And welcome to another episode of that 401k podcast. Ari Rosen, I'm here with Dan Ventori. Dan, how are you?
Doing great, sir. How is your 4th of July?
I want to say peaceful, but in the evening, in my neck of the woods, you got like mortar fire. That's what it felt like. I felt like I was in a war zone. They shut it off by 11 o'clock, but still, you're not talking about nice, Macy's Gucci fireworks. You're talking quarter sticks of dynamite and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I never understood that. I never understood why people wanted, M80s and cherry bombs and all these things that, could blow your arm off. I never understood that.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, when I grew up in Canarsie, Brooklyn, I always dreaded July 4th because, it was like nonstop. It'd be to all hours of the night. And I never understood why somebody would take their good hard-earned hard-earned money and just spend it on explosives. Nice fireworks, whatever, with the nice light, colors and all that stuff. That I get. But, these quarter sticks of dynamite and all that kind of stuff, I never understood it. I never will. It just seems, destructive and, littering and all that kind of stuff. But, when I moved to Oceanside, when I moved to Long Island for where I lived for a few years, it was kind of uneventful. But then lately it's just been, it gets worse and worse and worse. But it is what it is.
Well, you survived it. And you can enjoy the quiet for another 364 days.
Well, unfortunately, you'll probably the people that didn't explode everything they had on July 4th, they do explode some more until they run out. And I still, for the life of me, I still chuckle every time I'm in Pennsylvania and you see, the fireworks, the fireworks places that sell that stuff that they can't sell in New York.
Yep, they're right there on the border. There are two of them. I think Phantom is one of them, and maybe TNT is the other one.
Yeah, I see it all the time, so it's pretty funny to see it. Anytime you cross the border, all of a sudden, like, it's fireworks. I mean, they sell fireworks at Costco, so it's kind of funny, too.
They do. They do sell fireworks in Costco. They sell everything in Costco.
Pretty much. Except they don't sell cigarettes. They used to sell cigarettes, or they don't, or am I dating myself and they never did? I thought they did.
Yeah,
I think they used to.
I couldn't tell you, man.
I'm going back 25 years ago. I think they did. But anyway, this week's topic, dangers that as a 401k plan provider you need to avoid. It's just based on 20 years of experience, seeing a lot of seeing and working with plan providers who went out of business or struggled because of a lot of mistakes. These dangerous spots they had to deal with. And, again, it's based on a lot of experience of working with plan providers and working for plan providers. I spent 9.5 years working for third-party administration firms, worked a couple years for law firms, now almost 10 years on my own. You see, some things that are really dangerous for a plan provider. And, when you're in a competitive marketplace and you can't afford to make big mistakes. And we've seen a lot of providers make big mistakes.
You're right. But hey, listen, before we jump into today's topic, why don't we tell everybody about our upcoming conference?
Well, we'll talk about that later in the broadcast. Let's, because we'll have some announcements about that. And let's get right to the topic. And I think towards the end, we'll just mention what we got. Number one, checks and balances on employees. I always say that the reason I don't have employees is because I was an employee once too. But we've seen how certain employees, just the general nature of retirement plans, especially in plan administration, especially access to large amounts of money, a plan provider really has to be extra careful about the employees that they hire. Years ago, I worked for a TPA, and we had a plan administrator who was caught trying to steal money from participant accounts. They were trying to move money from a plan participant. He was trying to move money from a plan participant to his own IRA. And the only reason he got caught is because he actually got the digits on his IRA account wrong. Otherwise,
oh, come on, really?
Yeah, this is a true story. He did that, and that's the reason he got caught. All of a sudden, the plan custodian caught on to it and made a stink. Up until that time, he would have gotten away with it. And, in normal businesses, when you try to steal, they call 5-0, as they say. And we didn't. And the reason that we didn't is because the COO of the company didn't want anyone to know that there was no checks and balances to keep that employee from stealing the money and almost pretty much getting away with it. So the employee was just walked out the door, and for all I know, it's probably a plan administrator at some other TPA, which I think is, of course, a bad part of the business. When it comes to negative hirings, people they talked about Curb Your Enthusiasm, foisting bad employees onto other plant providers. So they don't fire people for cause. They keep mum. They give kind of fake endorsements, and they foist these bad employees on another plant provider. But it does happen where if you really don't watch, you don't have an eyes in back of your head, you can't keep tabs on these employees, and they're free to roam and free to steal assets. And especially now with cybersecurity and all that kind of stuff, plan providers really have to make sure that there are procedures in place to make sure that to make sure that one of your employees can't just steal money from participants.
Yeah. You don't have to have a license to be a record keeper or TPA. You could just set up shop. They're different, obviously, auditing levels, right? That you'd expect from your bigger plan providers, your bigger record keepers. That SOX, what is it, SOX 1, Ari?
Right.
But there are a ton of smaller shops that can act as a TPA, that have access to the secret formula Coke. They have access to all the records. They have access to Social Security numbers, and those are things that you need to be hyper vigilant about. I'd be surprised, and I'm pretty sure it just happened recently, or the product just came out recently. We're starting to see cybersecurity policies for TPAs and record keepers. I would hazard a guess that maybe 5% of TPAs have something like that in place. And not that I want to give anybody any bad ideas or anything, but they're ripe for mistakes. They're ripe for potential exposures. It's definitely something that you need to keep an eye on.
No, exactly right. But not only do you have to worry about theft by employees, you also have to worry about incompetence by plan employees. You're a TPA and you have a administrator who isn't very good. They make multiple errors. As a TPA, that's bad for your practice. And that's, in addition to worrying about employees that steal, you have to worry about employees that aren't very good at their job. And of course, if you're a TPA, it's important to have continuing education, making proper training, that sort of thing. And I've worked for TPAs that didn't do a very good job in training plan administrators or people in the inner workings of a TPA who really didn't know what they were doing. I remember the first TPA I ever worked at, we had a computer guy who wasn't very good at fixing computers, and all of a sudden they wanted to put him in charge of distributions. And eventually, one day, he wanted to pay out somebody who only had 18 grand, $31,000 as a distribution check, and only upon then did they fire him. They caught that error before they, issued the check. But again, you're a plan provider. You're in a highly competitive business. You can't afford to have employees who really, don't know exactly what they're doing in terms of plan administration. And it's you can't afford it. Like I always say, it's easier to um, it's easier to get fired than to get hired. And you get a couple of foul ups or even one major foul up, and all of a sudden you lost that business, and you really just can't afford to do that. And that's unfortunately you have one shot at it, and if you mess up terribly, that shot's over with.
Yeah, the margin for error is definitely thin. And there's a high degree of difficulty. I mean, to your point, there really isn't. I mean, there's continuing ed stuff. ASPA offers designations, and they require continuing education. Is there anything else that you could think of? Is there another way that plan providers should be helping their employees grow?
Well, they could conduct their own training. Outside of just ASPA. And, I worked for a TPA, the first TPA I ever worked at. I mean, they were taking kids out of college, my college, my alma mater, Stony Brook, and just all of a sudden throwing them into compliance areas where they had absolutely no knowledge and no background. Going from, taking, a psychology class to doing ADP and ACP testing without really the background to do it, it doesn't really help you out at all.
Now that seems pretty crazy, in fact.
And that's what we did. We did a lot of recruiting at Stony Brook, and when push came to shove, we had a compliance department separately from a administration department. So our administrators didn't do didn't do the compliance end of it, which is different from the second TPA that I worked at. And there were people, just like I said, right out of college. I was 26 years old when I started. And there are people 4 or 5 years younger than me, and I had that kind of ERISA training, and they didn't, and that was a problem because they really didn't offer anybody, training at all, and that's not something you can get thrown into the fire and from the get go, learn how to do compliance testing. To me, you need some sort of background, some sort of training, but teach his own. Unfortunately, some TPAs are better at preparing their employees and managing their employees than others. And you get one good, not good, but one bad employee who's either going to steal or going to commit massive amounts of compliance errors. And if you're a TPA, that's going to put you in a whole, heap of trouble. Same thing with auditors. If you have you're a CPA firm and you have an auditor who doesn't know what the heck they're doing, and they're letting these errors go through in the audit report, that's going to reflect badly on you in preparing plan audits. But, that's part of the course. And that's the problem with having employees. Having a good group of employees to help you out, that's fantastic. But when you have people who don't serve you well, that's going to be a problem. Okay, the next thing, a problem spot for 401k plan providers, watching who you refer as an outside plan provider. So much of this business is close in the community. Everybody kind of knows everybody. You have issues where you're going to refer work out. And the problem, of course, is referring work to providers that really don't deserve it, who screw it up. And it's happened to me where, I referred an auditor and it kind of blew up in my face when I found out that the guy didn't actually fulfill his CPA. He had one or two things left to fulfill his CPA requirements. He said he was a CPA, but there was like some CE class he didn't take, and so therefore, theoretically, he wasn't a CPA. And this is who I refer to as an auditor. That blew up in my face, especially for a plan sponsor client of mine. You dealing with an ERISA attorney, you really shouldn't have to bother to check out whether they're an actual attorney or not. But part of this business, referring people, referring work out, you got to be really careful whether the people you refer the work out can actually do the job, because you make a bad referral, it blows up in your face and it makes you look bad. And listen, this business, I work with Matt Hutchinson. I replaced Matt Hutchinson as the fiduciary of the MEP he didn't steal from. That was bad. Luckily, he didn't steal from the MEP that I succeeded him as the fiduciary, but still, it was a problem. It was an issue. Vantage Benefits. I wrote an article for them and touting they were touting their 316 services. The guy, the head of the company, steals $13 million from these 401k plans. I mean, I didn't refer work to these guys. I didn't refer work to Matt Hutchinson or to Vantage Benefits, but I use these examples as, you really got to watch out who you're going to refer work to, because, you get stuck with the nonsense by referring work out to these, really awful plan providers. And that's, like I said, it's a really you really have to worry who you refer work out to, and make sure they actually know how to do, know actually how to do a credible job.
I've actually been on the other side of that bum referral, and candidly, it sucks. Creates havoc in what you're doing. It cost us a couple of clients. It was pretty impactful on what we did. It was definitely a learning lesson. Won't make that mistake twice, but even on the end of the receiving end of that sort of relationship, do your diligence, right? Don't just take it for granted that because it came from a trusted source that it's going to end up being what you thought it would be, right? Kick the tires on it, ask lots of questions, and ultimately trust your gut. If it feels funny, walk away. Don't engage.
Yeah, and again, it's we talk about it all the time, but again, to actually, financial advisors really need to consider the TPAs that they refer work out to. I've seen quite a few TPAs who were fired just because they referred a bad TPA. They were doing a heck of a job as the financial advisor, but because they made the poor referral, they got fired. And that's something, you need to avoid. And that's why, I always talk about how advisors really need to be careful as to who is the TPA that they refer business to.
And what's next?
Next is living on the edge. You see too many, what do they say? You shouldn't fly too close to the sun. You're going to burn your wings.
That's Icarus, right?
What?
The myth of Icarus.
Yes, exactly. And I've seen it too much where you have a TPA who may be a little bit too aggressive with compliance testing. I knew a TPA that actually told their clients or potential clients that they guaranteed that the client would pass testing, especially a client that consistently failed. And you can't make guarantees. And if you make guarantees, maybe there's funny business going around. But, I'm talking about plan providers that are very, very aggressive in the margins, as I say. They're living on the edge in terms of how aggressive they are. It could be something as simple as playing with insurance and qualified plans. You'll see a lot of agents really push insurance to too much, where it becomes a problem. We saw that in the 412I plans back in the day. That's sort of, pushing the envelope. If you push the envelope and you're aggressive too much, you're on the edge, you're living on the edge, you might fall off. And I've seen too many plan providers who are very, very aggressive, just too aggressive in their interpretation and the way they handle their business, and suffered as a result. Because, you got to work between the lines. And when you're too close to the line, you cross it. And once you cross it, you can't just go back. And that's really a problem as a plan provider. You really can't be too aggressive You can't, get into trouble like that.
In that vein, Ari, I mean, again, knowing that there's a way to pass the test and run the test and be compliant. There's direction for all that, but there's a certain art to it as well. I mean, because first of all, what happens if, in the example that you had, just laid out, the TPA, whoever's running those tests, is too aggressive or overly aggressive, and they cross that line? What happens? I mean, is that uncovered in a DOL audit?
That's certainly getting covered in an IRS or DOL audit. And so, I think the example that I use, the company involved, quite honestly, had I guess it's not politically correct for me to say this, but they had a lot of illegal aliens. I had the salesperson from the TPA asked me a question about this plan sponsor once, and they said, well, do you think it's wrong? Do you think it's a problem if you have illegal aliens using the social security numbers of other, fake social security numbers and deferring? And I said to the salesperson, illegal aliens are not going to defer in a 401k plan. They tend to, like to send money home. They don't have money. They tend to have lower paid jobs. They don't have the money to defer. And anyway, even if they did, it's a crime and, whatever. But, I would assume that situation, what had happened, the guarantee about the discrimination testing was they just didn't include quite a few of these people as part of the test. And if you do that, then, well, maybe you could pass. But this was a company that I remember they were working with a previous TPA, and they consistently failed. And this was a client that didn't want to do safe harbor, didn't want to do automatic enrollment, kind of didn't want to do QNEX. Which, listen, these are the rules you got to live by. So they, wanted somebody who was very, very aggressive when it came to compliance testing. And I would assume that a whole bunch of these employees weren't included as part of the test. But that's what I'm always looking at. People who are really pushing the envelope, really being very, very aggressive in terms of how they interpret things. And it could be something as simple as control group and affiliated service group rules, where they try to say that something's not affiliated service group, even though it really fits an affiliated service group, that sort of thing. That kind of aggressive stance. And, being aggressive, works to the detriment a lot of times. I've seen it. And then next, I don't see it as much, but getting into trouble on social media. I see that more with other businesses, like local businesses, where a restaurant gets into a fight with somebody who's ticked off on social media, than for everybody to see it. I really don't see it that much on LinkedIn dealing with plan providers, but it's a cautionary tale where I've seen too many businesses. Social media is a great way of building a practice, but if you don't handle it correctly, it's a great way of tearing it down. And, I've seen businesses go completely off track. I remember, there's like not like a gym, but it was something like a cross-train place right by my house. And the guy took this political stance about gun control, and he was just attacking other people in the neighborhood. And it was a neighborhood business. And to me, I don't care what part of the political side you are or whatever it is, I think getting involved in political disputes on social media is just not good practice. That sort of thing. Or, businesses that just treat, customers badly, and, the customer goes online and talks about it. And so then the company feels the need to attack the customer, and all that kind of stuff. Social media, again, reputation as business, you have a lifetime. It can take a lifetime to build it, and it can be gone in an instant. And when you're playing games on social media and you're not dealing well with customers and other plan providers and competing plan providers, it's just going to make you look bad, and make you look bad in front of a lot of people.
Agreed. That stuff is permanent. You can't erase it.
Exactly. And even if you do delete it, people take screenshots of it. It's just really bad. I remember what had happened was, as you know, there was a sanitation election in my area, and I was supporting one candidate against the other. And the election hasn't been decided yet. It's going to court, whatever it is. It's a close election. Anyway, the one of the candidates I was against was a guy running. He owned the body shop that I used, and his brother was attacking me on Facebook, just like just because I was supporting the other candidate. And I said to the guy, I said, you know what? Next time I have an accident or whatever, I'm not going to use you guys. And I've used you guys 3-4 times in the past. And I think at that point, his brother sensed the problem and apologized. But it's just there's a point where it's there's no point in getting into little these spats. It makes you look unprofessional, and just avoid doing it. And sometimes I'll get criticized on LinkedIn with an article I wrote or whatever it is, and I just try to keep it classy. Your opinion is your opinion. If I tell you that I think that the payroll providers are bad TPAs, and you happen to work for one of these two payroll providers, that's your opinion. That was my opinion, and nobody's opinion is right or wrong. It's just an opinion. And so I've always tried to avoid having spats on LinkedIn or other parts of social media. It makes it look bad.
Mm.
And last but not least on our list, I think a dangerous spot is not sensing change in this business. Fee disclosure to me is a perfect example of that. How many times we saw plan providers not sense change when it came to fee disclosure. They built on a business where they hit fees and they couldn't relate to a changing environment, and as a result, they suffered. And either went out of business or had to sell out their business or whatever it is. And I think that as a plan provider, you have to be one step in front of that wave. You have to ride that wave. You can't be behind it. And always keep your ear close to the ground and see what's the change that's coming about. If you're a broker and you have to think about what happens if you become a fiduciary, that's something to consider. Or if MEPs are going to come back in fashion, how's that going to impact your business if you're a TPA? A whole host of things. We've seen too many plan providers fail because once it changed to a fee disclosure business, they couldn't compete, and they yayyed all of us to pieces. And when we suggested that fee disclosure was going to be a game changer in the retirement plan business.
Yeah, man, we've seen consolidation that doesn't seem to be stopping on the TPA record keeper side. At all levels too, right? I mean, Wells just got bought by Principal. Ascensus is buying just about every other record keeper, it seems. So there's a ton of that, and we talk about that all the time. And I think part of what leads people to sell is your point. They haven't adjusted, or they haven't adjusted to what's required in the near term. Others haven't adjusted to what's coming down the road. I mean, I got into a fight the other day with a client about paper. I don't know if I told you this, but we were arguing about an issue with the reporting that's simply caused by paper enrollments. Right? Issues happen. Things get lost, and frankly, most providers don't even really touch them. So, I guess my point was that there was a dramatic shift, dynamic shift in just how we do things and how we operate recently, from shifting from everything being paper and hard copy now to being everything is electronic. And I'm sure there were a bunch of folks that got caught up in that wave, didn't evolve quickly enough, and aren't in the business anymore.
Exactly. I learned from a paralegal that I learned from when I first started this business. She told me, she worked in the business pre-ERISA, and she said, in the Tax Reform Act of '86, there are a lot of plan providers that, especially on the DB side, that couldn't adjust, and they just simply went out of business. And I've always held that to be true. I think that anytime that there's a certain change in the business, it has a way of weeding people out, weeding plan providers out. Some take advantage of it, and some are hurt by it. So, that's part of the nature of the business, and that's a dangerous spot to avoid. Not being able to be on top of change and not understanding how that change is going to affect you. So that's it about that. So again, going back to our events, yes, Disney World, we're still pushing that one, March 10th and 11th. That's the big one, the big event, as they say. And then, of course, on our schedule, Cleveland on September 20th, Foxborough on October 11th. We just booked East Rutherford, New Jersey. Is going to be November the 8th. And December 13th, Arlington, Texas. And that's it for 2019. And, of course, like I said, that 401k National Conference at Disney World, March 10th and 11th. Got anything to add about our events?
Looking forward to them. It should be a ton of fun. I think Disney's going to be a very different experience for a lot of folks. I do want to add that Ari did buy a bunch of tickets to a ball game in Cleveland. So, guys, if you're coming out to the Cleveland event, please let us know if you're going to the game. We had a bunch of tickets at one of the last events that we basically had to get rid of in a fire sale. So we kind of want to avoid that. So just let Ari know if you plan on making it to the game.
So, yeah, of course, check that 401ksite.com for further details on each event, who's going to be there and speaking, and the guests that we're going to have as we book them as we get closer and closer to the fall. Disney is going to be, again, something exceptional and different. When you've been to one national event, in most instances, you feel like you've been to every national event, and our event is going to be very, very different. That's all I could promise. It's going to be very, very different, very unique, very, very, very memorable. And again, it's going to be a lot of fun. Galaxy's Edge, Star Wars is going to be open by then. So, bring the family, have a couple days at Disney, then attend our event, 2-day event at the Walt Disney World Swan. So that's it for this week. We will talk to you again next week. Same podcast, same channel. Ari saying so long, and Dan, I guess, saying so long as well.
Have a great weekend, guys. Take care.
Bye.